I loved my husband Michael's steadiness, but I never imagined his younger brother's charm could twist into obsession. What began as innocent visits turned into a dangerous game that threatened my marriage and my safety. This is my story of betrayal, consequences, and the hard lesson I learned about boundaries and trust. I first met Michael's brother, Mark, when we were still dating. Even then, there was something about the way he smiled, playful, a little reckless, that put me on edge. Years later, after Michael and I had built a quiet life together, that smile still flickered whenever Mark came around, like a spark near dry grass. It was a cool October evening when Michael came home late from work. I was on the porch, laughing at one of Mark's wild travel stories. He leaned against the railing, tan and restless, telling me about ziplining through the Costa Rican jungle. The air smelled of wood smoke and wet leaves. Michael's footsteps on the driveway made me straighten. "Hey, you too," he said, setting down his briefcase. "Didn't expect to see you here, Mark." Mark grinned wider. "Passing through town. Thought I'd drop by." I tucked a strand of hair behind my ear. "He was just telling me about his trip to Costa Rica," I explained. Michael nodded, his expression polite but cool. Mark's world was always exotic beaches and adrenaline rushes. Michael's was spreadsheets and late nights. I'd once loved his steadiness, or so I thought. After dinner, the brothers sat out back with beers. I could hear the low murmur of their voices through the screen door. When Michael came to bed later, he lay awake staring at the ceiling. "You think Mark's changed?" he asked quietly. I sighed. "He's still Mark. Impulsive. Charming. He likes attention." "Yeah," Michael whispered. "He does." The weeks that followed felt like a slow boil. Mark began showing up more often, dropping off forgotten items, offering to fix the leaky faucet, inviting me to art shows when Michael was stuck at work. I told myself he was harmless, that family helped family. But a tiny voice inside whispered that I was crossing a line by letting him stay so close. Then one night Michael came home early. I was in the kitchen pouring wine. Mark was leaning close, telling a joke that made me laugh. His fingers brushed mine as I handed him the glass. It was innocent, but the moment Michael's eyes met mine, I saw how it looked. "What's going on?" Michael asked, voice tight. "Just sharing a bottle," Mark said easily. "Emily needed a taste tester." I felt my cheeks flush. "Mark was just leaving," I said quickly. He lingered a heartbeat longer than necessary before rising. "Another time, then." When the door closed, Michael turned to me. "Why do you let him come here so much?" I stiffened. "He's your brother." "He's crossing lines," Michael snapped. "And you're letting him." Anger flared. "Don't put this on me. Maybe if you were home more." The words hung between us like smoke. I turned away, heart hammering. Something was wrong. I was wrong. Mark was wrong. But I couldn't quite untangle it. A week later, Michael left town for a work trip. Feeling restless, I drove out to our father-in-law's cabin to clear my head. Mark's car was already parked out front. My pulse pounded as I stepped onto the porch. Through the window, I saw him pacing on the phone. I cracked the door just enough to hear. "She's going to leave him," Mark was saying. "She just needs a little push." My stomach dropped.
"He was talking about me."
I stepped inside. "A little push?" I said. He froze. "Emily, you've been planning this?" My voice shook.
"Me?
"My marriage." He set down the phone slowly.
You don't understand."
"I understand perfectly," I hissed. "You've been trying to steal me." His eyes turned defiant. "You deserve better. He's never around. You've lost him already." I backed toward the door, shaking. "Get out."
"Now."
He brushed past me with a sneer. "This isn't over." I stood alone in the cabin, heart hammering, the smell of pine and betrayal thick in the air. In that moment I vowed he would not take anything more from me. Not my marriage, not my peace, not my future. I didn't drive straight home after confronting Mark at the cabin. Instead, I pulled over at a gas station and sat in the car with the engine running, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles whitened. The glow of the fluorescent lights above the pumps made everything feel unreal. Mark's words echoed in my head. "You deserve better.
You've lost him already.
Had Michael already lost me without realizing it? When I finally got home, the house was silent. Michael was still on his business trip, and the emptiness pressed in on me. I paced the kitchen, then pulled out my phone and stared at Mark's number, my thumb hovering. I wasn't sure whether I wanted to block him or call him and scream. In the end, I dropped the phone onto the counter and went upstairs to bed, fully clothed. The next morning I woke up to a flurry of texts from Mark. "We need to talk. You're making a mistake. He doesn't deserve you." I deleted them without replying. For the first time, I felt truly afraid of him. When Michael returned 2 days later, he looked exhausted. "Long trip," he muttered, setting his suitcase down. I watched him from the kitchen doorway, wondering if he could see the storm inside me. "Michael," I began, "I need to tell you something about Mark." He looked up sharply. "What about him?" I hesitated. The word stuck in my throat. "He's been crossing boundaries, saying things he shouldn't." Michael's jaw tightened. "I know," he said quietly. "I went to the cabin last week. I heard him on the phone." I blinked. "You heard him?" Michael nodded. "I confronted him, told him to stay away." Relief and anger mixed in my chest. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I didn't want to make you feel guilty," he said. "Or ashamed. This isn't your fault." Tears burned my eyes. For months I'd felt like I was slipping, like the ground between us was crumbling. Now, suddenly, Michael was here, steady as a rock. "I'm sorry," I whispered. He reached across the counter, took my hand. "We'll handle this together." We didn't have to wait long for Mark's next move. 2 days later, he showed up at Michael's office, stormed past the receptionist, and started shouting in the lobby about how Michael had stolen me from him. Security had to escort him out. Michael came home pale and furious. "That's it," he said. "I'm filing for a restraining order." I bit my lip. "He's your brother." Michael's eyes were cold. "Not anymore." The paperwork moved faster than I expected. Within a week, a judge signed the temporary order. Mark was forbidden from contacting me or coming within 100 yards of our home. Part of me felt guilty, but another part felt an enormous weight lift from my shoulders. Mark didn't go quietly. He sent one last email, a rambling manifesto about how he and I were meant to be and how Michael had brainwashed me. He threatened to expose things about Michael that never existed. We forwarded the email to our attorney and blocked him everywhere.
Then silence.
The holidays came and went without a word from Mark. Michael and I began rebuilding our routine. We went to counseling. We took evening walks. Slowly, the tension in the house began to ease. But under the surface, I knew the story wasn't over. People like Mark didn't just disappear. One rainy February morning, Michael got a call from their father. Mark had lost his job, his apartment, and most of his friends. His reckless spending and erratic behavior had caught up with him. He was living out of his car. "I don't want to see him," Michael said, staring out the window. He made his choices. I sat at the table, coffee cooling in my hands. Part of me ached for the boy I'd first met, the one who'd been charming and funny, not dangerous. But I also remembered the fear in my chest at the cabin. "You don't owe him anything," I said softly. Michael turned to me. "Neither do you." For the first time in months, I felt like we were on the same side. That night, lying in bed, I thought about how close we'd come to losing everything: our marriage, our safety, our sense of family. Mark had tried to steal me from Michael, but in the end, he'd stolen only from himself. His job, his relationships, his future. I whispered into the dark, "It's over." Michael squeezed my hand. "It's over," he echoed. But in my heart, I knew the lesson would stay with me forever. Love without boundaries invites chaos, and betrayal always carries a cost. Spring crept in slowly that year. The snow melted from our lawn in uneven patches, leaving behind damp soil and tiny green shoots. On the outside, our life looked normal again. Michael went to work, I returned to my freelance projects, and in the evenings we cooked dinner together like we used to. But inside me, something was still raw. I jumped at every unknown number that called my phone. I caught myself scanning the street when I walked to the store. One April afternoon, a letter arrived with no return address. My stomach tightened before I even opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, Mark's handwriting scrawled across it. I've lost everything because of you two.
But you'll see.
People don't just vanish. My hands trembled. Michael read the note twice, and then folded it carefully. We'll give it to the lawyer, he said. Don't respond. But that night, lying awake, I kept hearing the line, people don't just vanish. Was it a threat, a promise, or a cry for help? A week later, Michael's father called again. Mark had been arrested for trespassing on company property where he used to work, trying to collect his severance from the office safe. He was in county jail, awaiting a hearing. I should go see him, Michael said quietly after he hung up. I stared at him. Why? He's my brother, he said, and he's self-destructing. I shook my head. He made these choices. He tried to destroy us. Michael rubbed his temples. I know. But maybe seeing him will close this chapter for me. I didn't argue. Some wounds you have to touch once more before they heal. 2 days later, Michael visited the jail. He came home pale and silent. When I asked how it went, he just shook his head. He's not the same person. He blames everyone but himself. He said he hesitated. What? He said you'll come to him eventually. That you're only with me out of guilt. A chill swept over me. He's delusional. I know, Michael said, but be careful anyway. That evening I sat at my desk and wrote in my journal for the first time in months. I wrote about Mark's charm and how it had flattered me at first. I wrote about the tension between brothers, about the way a marriage can grow cracks so small you don't notice until someone else slips a wedge inside. And I wrote about my own guilt, not for what I'd done, but for what I'd allowed to fester. I ended the entry with a single sentence. I choose Michael and I choose boundaries. It felt like a spell, like closing a door. Mark's hearing came and went. He was sentenced to probation and mandatory counseling. We heard through Michael's father that he was living in a halfway house now, trying to get sober. He'd burned through his savings and sold his car. The man who had once seemed untouchable was at rock bottom. One Sunday afternoon, as Michael napped on the couch, my phone buzzed. A new email popped up. No subject line, no signature. Just 2 words. I'm sorry. I stared at the screen. It had to be Mark. My finger hovered over reply for a long time. Then I closed the email, archived it, and went downstairs to sit with my husband. Some doors you don't reopen. Life didn't magically turn perfect after that. Michael and I still went to counseling. We still had nights where silence filled the house heavier than words. But slowly, the texture of our days changed. The paranoia faded. The laughter returned. We started planning a trip together. Our first in years. Just the 2 of us, no brothers, no family drama. We chose Costa Rica, almost as a dare to the past. On the flight down, I looked out the window at the blue ocean below and thought about Mark. I didn't know where he was, or if he'd truly changed. But I knew this. He had tried to take me away from Michael, and in doing so, he'd taken himself away from everything that mattered. His obsession had cost him his job, his freedom, his family's trust. And it had almost cost me my marriage. I reached for Michael's hand. He squeezed back, eyes still closed, and for the first time in a long time, I felt safe. That night in Costa Rica, lying under a ceiling fan that hummed like a lazy insect, I whispered into the dark, "It's over." But some small part of me also whispered, "Never again." Boundaries, honesty, vigilance. Love isn't just about feeling. It's about protecting what you've built from those who destroy it, even if they share your last name. And in that moment, I understood the real twist of the story. Mark had lost everything, but in nearly losing me, Michael and I had found each other again. Costa Rica smelled like rain and hibiscus. It was the first morning of our trip. Michael was still asleep, his arm draped across my waist. Outside, howler monkeys called in the distance, and waves rolled against the shore. I lay there listening, thinking of how far we'd come since that night at the cabin. Mark's shadow was still somewhere out there in the world, but it felt like it had lost its power over me. I no longer checked my phone expecting threats. I no longer jumped when a car slowed near the house. The quiet was a kind of healing. After breakfast, we went zip-lining through the jungle. The same story Mark had once told me on our porch. As I clipped into the harness, I thought about how he'd made adventure into a lure, a way of slipping under people's skin. But flying over the treetops with Michael behind me, I felt the thrill without the manipulation. It belonged to me now. On the third day of our trip, Michael received a voicemail from his father. "Mark's checking into a long-term program," the message said. "He's asked me to pass along that he's sorry for everything." Michael played it twice, then looked at me. "What do you think?" I stared at the phone. "I think it's good he's getting help," I said slowly. "But it doesn't change what happened." Michael nodded. "We don't have to let him back into our lives. Forgiveness doesn't mean access." Those words felt like a bomb. For months I had been torn between guilt and anger, between wanting Mark punished and wanting him saved. Now, for the first time, I understood that I could wish him well from a distance. When we returned home, life unfolded quietly. We planted a small vegetable garden. We kept going to counseling. We spoke openly about work schedules and stress instead of letting resentment grow in the dark. The cracks in our marriage hadn't disappeared, but we were filling them together, brick by brick. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sun set, Michael said, "You know, I used to think I had to fix everything for my brother. Even when he hurt me." I reached for his hand. "And I used to think being nice meant never saying no." We both laughed softly. The sound felt like sunlight after a storm. 2 months later, an envelope arrived. It was from Mark, but this time through official channels, forwarded by his program. Inside was a handwritten letter. "Emily and Michael, I'm finally in a place where people are telling me the truth, and I'm starting to listen. I'm ashamed of what I did. I thought I could take what you had and make it mine, but I was really trying to fill a hole in myself. I don't expect forgiveness, but I'm trying to change. Mark." I read it aloud at the kitchen table. When I finished, Michael sat quietly for a long time. "It's the first time he's owned it," he said. I nodded. "But that doesn't mean we invite him back." Michael folded the letter and tucked it into a drawer.
"Right.
Some things we leave in the past." That night I wrote in my journal again. Boundaries are love. Love for yourself. Love for the people you choose. Without them, kindness becomes weakness and trust becomes a weapon. As I set the pen down, I realized the story had reached its real ending. Not the dramatic confrontation at the cabin. Not the restraining order or the jail. The ending was here, in the quiet of our kitchen, where we had drawn a line and chosen each other. Months later, when people asked how Michael and I had gotten through the family drama, I never gave them the whole story. I just said, it taught us a lot about trust. But in my heart, I carried the full lesson. That betrayal can come from the people closest to you. That boundaries aren't cruelty, they're protection. And that sometimes the person who tries to destroy you ends up destroying only themselves. Mark had tried to steal me from Michael, but in the process he had stripped away every illusion he'd built about himself. He had lost his job, his freedom, his family's trust. But maybe, just maybe, he had found a starting point for his own healing. And we, on the other side of it, had found something too, a deeper honesty, a marriage rebuilt, and the courage to say no. As the first autumn leaves fell again, I sat on the porch where it had all begun, the same porch where Mark had once stood, spinning stories of adventure. The air smelled of wood smoke. Michael came out with 2 mugs of coffee and handed me one. "Do you ever think about him?" he asked.
"Sometimes," I said.
"But not the way I used to." He nodded. "Me too." We sat in silence, sipping our coffee as the sky blazed orange. In that stillness, I felt the story settle inside me like a finished book. The chapters were written. The lesson was clear. And at last, it was mine to tell. I'm telling you this story now because it's taken me a long time to understand it. For months, maybe years, I thought of myself as a victim of my brother-in-law's obsession. Then I thought of myself as a survivor of betrayal. Only recently have I started to see myself as something else, a woman who chose to draw a line, and who rebuilt a life on the other side of it. When people watch dramatic stories online, it's easy to point to the villain and say, he was the problem. But life isn't that simple. Mark was charming, wounded, and manipulative all at once. He saw cracks in my marriage and used them, but he didn't create all of those cracks. Some were ours, some were mine. Looking back now, I see how quietly resentment and distance can grow if you don't tend to them. The first lesson I took from all of this is honesty. Not just with your partner, but with yourself. If something feels off, if you're leaning on someone outside your marriage for the kind of attention you're supposed to nurture inside it, be honest.
Speak it.
Don't let secrecy be the soil where betrayal takes root. The second lesson is boundaries. Boundaries aren't walls to shut people out. They're fences that show where love begins and ends. By the time Mark crossed the line, I had let my own boundaries blur. I thought being kind meant never saying no. I thought loyalty meant absorbing whatever someone threw at me. It doesn't. Kindness without boundaries is a slow erosion of yourself. The third lesson is forgiveness without access. When Mark wrote from rehab to say he was sorry, I didn't tear up the letter. I didn't curse his name. But I also didn't open the door. Forgiveness, I've learned, is not an invitation. It's a release, a way of putting down a heavy stone you've been carrying so you can move forward. Sometimes people ask me if I'm angry at Mark. My honest answer is, not anymore. Anger kept me awake at night. It made me jump at shadows. It gave him space in my head long after he was gone. Letting go of that anger doesn't mean excusing him. It means reclaiming my own peace. And finally, there's the lesson of choice. Mark lost everything trying to take something that wasn't his. In a way, that was his choice too. I can't control that. But I can control the choices I make in my marriage, my friendships, and my life. I can choose honesty. I can choose boundaries. I can choose to protect what matters instead of hoping someone else will. If you're listening to this and it feels uncomfortably familiar, if you have someone in your life who crosses your lines, or if you found yourself drawn into a triangle you never wanted, take this as a sign. Draw the line sooner. Speak the truth sooner. Don't wait for the dramatic moment at the cabin. You don't need it. You're allowed to say no before someone else's choices blow up your world. When I sit on my porch now with Michael, coffee steaming between us, I still hear echoes of the past. But they're faint. They don't control me. Our marriage isn't perfect, no one's is, but it's stronger and clearer.
We talk.
We tell each other when we're tired, when we're scared, when we're lonely. We don't let silence become a weapon. And that, maybe, is the quiet twist of this whole story. Mark tried to steal me from Michael, and in trying, he revealed the weak spots we hadn't wanted to see. In losing everything, he forced us to either collapse or rebuild. We chose to rebuild. We chose each other. So if there's one thing I want you to take from my story, it's this. Love is not just a feeling, it's a practice. It's the everyday work of honesty, boundaries, and choice. Protect it, tend it, and don't be afraid to stand up for it, even when the person testing it shares your blood. That's the story of how my brother-in-law tried to steal my life and lost his own. But more importantly, it's the story of how my husband and I nearly lost each other and found our way back. And if my telling it helps even one person step back from the edge, then the pain wasn't wasted.